Hi, I'm Kurt from Kurt's Auto, and this is going to be part 2 of putting this 1986 Ford Mustang on a QA1 handling package. Before we get there, we got some rust repair we have to do. So in this episode, I'm going through and getting the chassis with the subframe connectors installed, cutting out all of the rust, and getting the QA1 subframe installed on the car. We have added the entire framing on the outside, the main rail, and all the webbing is welded on. I didn't like how you can see here, this one just stops right here, and there's this whole section. I added this plate and plated it all off. So my transmission mount was all messed up and bent anyway, and it's just thin, flimsy metal. So I took and removed the section that was connected to the frame rail, and I added this piece all the way back here to stiffen up this entire rail, which brought it all the way into where the tubular cross member is gonna mount right to this. So I have structure tied all the way through. My next step is gonna be cut this ridge off, and I'm gonna make a flat plate that comes off of here, and I'm gonna weld a flat piece of steel on the front and on the back to rebox this in. I don't think I need any structure here. I think I'm just gonna run 2 plates out. I'll leave this original piece here, at least a some of it, just so the bolt stays in the exact same place. So because this side's not damaged, I'm not sure if I'm gonna do it yet, but I think what we'll end up doing is probably the same thing. Cut it here, slide a plate all the way back to here, run it all the way out, and connect back into this piece. And this will be the strongest possible way to do it. We've also purchased a frame repair kit that has all these pre-bent pieces of steel that replace the inside of this rail and the top of this rail. The outside section will get left there. So I have to drill out some spot welds, and I end up cutting it right on the edge here. Obviously this is still all rusty because the battery's up here and it's all just deteriorated. So we're gonna sand all this down and clean it up. And we are having a piece of steel cut that will come out to about here. And it'll run all the way back to the firewall, come down, re-catch this same heavier piece of steel, and be welded in all the way across here on both sides. So that's gonna tie basically this entire subframe section all the way up into the strut tower area. This lower section where it's all swollen and completely rusted out. This kit comes with a few plates, and in the middle, these cylinders are up inside here to keep it from crushing when you tighten up the frame. And they're all rusted out in there. So if I don't replace these, the bolt will collapse and the frame won't stay tight. So that's what we're gonna do to fix that. All right, so kind of a closer look here at the rust. This whole top plate is gonna have to come out. I'm gonna remove most of this rusty strut tower in here. Inside of here, there's some cylinders, which are these pieces. And so there's a heavier frame rail, the inner strut plate, which this will actually sit down inside here, which will just come up to where the rust ends. So I'll have to get these bolts out of here. I'm not sure exactly what that holds on to. The proportioning valves here, which is fine. I got to change that anyway. So I'll end up coming right across here, welding this all in solid, putting in the supports for the bolts, and then this is the new top plate that drops right in there, just like the factory had it. So this is gonna stay original. However, I have a piece of laser cut steel that should cover up this entire area. And so we'll just clean this up and we'll reinforce it all. Cut away the upper plate, and this is how bad the rust is. These are the cylinders that the bolts are supposed to be supported in. And it's just completely packed in here with just rust. This whole thing's just falling apart. So really good thing we're fixing this. The whole thing's just completely filled with rust. Nasty. I'm literally digging handfuls. This is terrible. I could put the screwdriver all the way through here, it just falls apart and comes out in chunks like this. All right, after I got rid of all the loose rust, this is how much of the frame rail is actually left. Whole thing's pretty much just shot. So this is how much rust, besides what I already swept up and threw away, came out of here. She's pretty rotten. It's a good thing we actually are fixing this, because I don't think this car would have made it another year without breaking in half between the damage to the floor pans. And this used to be where all the spring weight is. We're actually moving the weight of the spring to up in the shock tower now, but I still have to fix this because this is where the chassis or the cross member bolts into. Anyway, I've gotten it down to where I have actual good metal there. I have to slice it apart right here and get a nice straight cut back here where I can weld, and I'll get everything in the right place, and then we'll cut this bottom plate off, and then we'll weld the new piece of frame rail in. But it's looks like this kit should work really nice. This piece here is going to sit down inside. I still have to make a little bit more room for it by cutting out this little piece over here, and then I can get this line in the back straight across to mate up with the top of this. All right, well, that's what it looks like. The whole thing's cut out. I've got it set up. I'll show you how this fits in there. This piece is going to be the start of rebuilding my frame rail. It's going to fit in there just like that. I'll get that welded into place, and then we'll put the rest of it together. And the front frame will be, well, it's actually going to be stronger than brand new with obviously all the reworking of the chassis. And I'm going to have a laser cut piece that is going to come up and tie from here all the way across the front, because this piece doesn't actually get replaced with this kit. This kit only comes with the inside parts. So, but I've got it modified to fit perfect. I just got to clean up this rust a little bit to where I'm going to weld it, and we're going to get it fitted in. All right, well, I got my frame tacked in exactly where I wanted it. These holes should be exactly where they were at. It does look like it's a little low right here, but that's because you can actually see this weld. This frame rail was actually straightened. There was another weld that I cut off that was right here. That was from the accident, but this should be exactly where I wanted it at. I made marks on the outside to make sure that they lined up perfectly straight with the holes in the exact location they were at. But I'll make sure if there's any final adjustments that need to be made before I weld it solid. Obviously, I got to clean up some of the rust and get it ready for welding also, but I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. So I got my inside plate and the tubes that the bolts go through mounted in, all coated in primer and ready to weld in. So the next step, I have the other pieces down here. This is the top plate and the sides that'll box it in. I've got this all in the right position here. Let me get the light out of there so you can see. So the next step is going to be to weld the inner frame rail in and get this inside plate that you can see that's primered up here tacked in. I'll primer this once I get it all welded, because obviously I can still do that once it's done. But I already test fit the frame section, made sure it fit perfect. Should be ready to go. I have it pretty solid. I got this all ground in, ready to go. The tubes are up inside there for the bolts. I'll probably clean this weld up a little bit. I might not worry about it too much. Eventually we're going to pull the engine out, and I'll probably worry about cleaning up the welds when we paint the firewall and stuff. But it turned out pretty good. You can see down inside there, the tubes are welded in. And now I just got to get the cap on top, and then I got to fill in everything that's around there. I still have the front supported right now on a 4x4. While I'm doing any welding, I wanted all the weight where it's going to actually be at in the shock tower, because with the coil over, all the weight of the car is going to be at the top of the coil spring. So that way it keeps the body straight. There's just a little bit of pressure on the hoist, but all the weight right now is on the beams. That way it's as straight as it can be. And yeah, we'll get this outside plate, and I'll get the top plate put in here, and we'll get the side plates, and it'll be like new. Well, so I got the rest of the kit installed. I got the side plates welded up. I obviously have a gap here. I believe I'm gonna go on the inside and put another piece of metal. Well, obviously I have to fill that gap in. I don't think I can fill that with just a weld. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna cut a little bit more metal out and put a different piece of metal in there. Okay, so I thought I'd show you some of the rust in the floorboard. There's a plate here that went on top of the actual floor, so rust got between the two and just rotted it out all the way across. So So also this big plate is kind of what the inner rocker panel, which is like the inner frame rail, because it's a unibody, connects to the firewall and the A-pillar. And you can see how it's welded all the way across here, and it's welded like here. Not so much across the top back in there. There's a couple little drops of weld. So it's basically here and here. Look at it from underneath. All right, so from underneath here, there's a little bit of a weld here, and that's about it, all the way up. And I mean, look at how loose this plate is, all the way to the firewall. So I'm kind of glad that the floor was rotted out here, because I'm going to take advantage of that and run this outer extra subframe rail that I welded on all the way up to this. First, because this is back a little bit, I'm going to put a plate connecting this to this, and then I'm going to add weld from here to there before I put my floor back in. So that should strengthen this up considerably, because even right now with the subframes in there, I'm getting a lot of bend and flex in here when I take the 4x4s out and I let the weight of the engine push down. It screws up the door closing. So I know I'm getting a ton of flex out of this area, and obviously there's hardly anything left of the factory floorboard. I don't know if I'm going to completely cut this out. I'm going to get rid of obviously the majority of the rusty part and re-weld a new piece on the inside and a new piece on the bottom. It comes all the way up to here. You can actually see the two pieces separate. Actually, I can't tell if you can right now on this. Kind of. There's like a lower floor and an upper floor. And this upper floor, I think, also helped give it strength. So I'm gonna add a ton to this side over here to make sure that this doesn't bend and flex anymore. Well, I've cleaned all the rust out of the floor pan area. I've made a new floor pan. I kind of got it sitting up here. It was guarding where I was welding. I re-welded this inner plate that wasn't connected very well. And then I added a piece of this 1-inch bar. Actually, I think it's 1.5 inch wide piece, connecting this subframe rail to the inner frame rail of the rocker panel. And I put a little piece of angle iron on here just to catch the floor pan when it comes down, so I don't have to worry about the corner. It'll be really easy just to seal it right to there. So I got rid of all the bad crusty metal. The rest of what's here is in pretty decent shape yet, but I did spray everything with rust reform, and I'm gonna let that dry. I'm gonna get my panel out, get it primed and ready to put in. So I went ahead and primered my reinforcement plates that I had laser cut. So this one is got a weld through primer on it, and we're gonna clean up this area, and it's gonna fit just like this. And it'll tie support all the way from this main heavier bracket up through the bottom of the shock tower and tie support into where the sway bar mounts on the outside rail here. All right, so before I get my outer plate, I wanted to make sure that the frame was fitting perfect. So you can actually see there's a bit of a gap right here. Let me get a light, move that brake line a little bit. And so I have a tiny gap here, which is actually caused from where they welded this front frame rail on from the accident. So I'm gonna have to do a little grinding here to get rid of this gap on this side, because this piece has to go up just a little bit. And I have this supported by this clamp, and on the other side I'm supported only by the vice grip. And you can see this side actually fits even closer together. Before I get it welded here, there is a tiny gap with, you know, just the weight of it hanging down. And I actually think that that gap is caused from the other side, where we're not fitting tight because of this welding here. So it's kind of hard to see. They covered their weld up with putty, so you couldn't see it as much. But right underneath here is the subframe repair, where they took and they replaced all the way up and through here. And this whole section has been replaced off of a different car and tied in on the other side. So it's pretty straight, but we definitely still have a gap here that I gotta fix. So won't be too difficult. I'll get that taken care of. And yeah, I think a little grinding here. I definitely have to grind the outside. Once we get the plates in, frame's gonna fit perfect. I'll be happy with it. Well, here's another crappy factory weld. So I started to grind this and it sounded like it wasn't connected, and sure enough, I got a screwdriver and the weld was never even touched in the frame rail back here. So I'm gonna take and I think drill these spot welds out and put my new plate underneath this gusset, and then put this gusset or this bracket back on top of my new plate. It obviously wasn't doing anything anyway, so drilling out the spot welds and just bending this out like this and then putting the plate behind it, it'll get closer to this point and there'll be less of a gap where these pieces of metal are stacked on top of each other. So I got this all ground out, and I got the weld down here ground so that the frame should fit nice and flat. I took a straight edge and put it in there. Should be all good. But yeah, they filled this all with Bondo to cover up their weld. So I'm gonna clean it up a little bit better, and then we'll hit all this rust with rust reform, prime it, paint it, and it'll look like new or better. All right, so I got underneath the plate all cleaned up, primered and painted. This plate's installed here. We're gonna get the car supported again on the 4x4s to make sure that all the weight's on the spring or with the spring location. And then I'm gonna get this plate welded in, and then eventually I'll rewrap this bracket back over it once I get it welded. So I got the rear plate all welded in, so it's gonna tie from the new subframe connector all the way up into the upper mount for the rear differential. Also, in addition to having the extra plate that I welded in here to strengthen the upper control arm mount, we also bought these brackets. So these will actually bolt in where the upper control arm mount bolts there, and then this will get mounted into the frame and be supported right underneath where the coilover is going to go. In addition to that, this bar actually goes between the two bolts and ties the two upper control arms together, so that way the bolts are also strengthened up and stiffened up a little bit. So with all these pieces in here, I would have to say this is going to be a very solid unibody. All right, well, I'm finally at a point where I can start putting things back together. The engine cradle is about to go in. I got my new engine mounts mounted to the block. This has all been reinforced and welded in. The new frame section's completely solid. I added a couple pieces of angle iron into the strut tower because we are moving the coil spring to the top of the strut, or to the top of the strut tower, instead of being inside this frame down here in the K-frame. Floor pans, I did cut out the rusty section. I did not buy new pans. We just made some out of steel, and I have to finish painting that area, but I have some seam sealer on it that's drying. All right, for the rear, I have all of the torque boxes all welded up. The plates that go through the floor are installed. New control arms are installed. The upper has this BMR upper control arm reinforcement kit, along with the plates that are inside here behind the control arms themselves. The control arms are installed. The new plates installed. Everything's ready to go. I have the differential sitting right here, and we're gonna get this stuck inside the car. I want to make an additional bracket for the top of the mount that goes across the inside of the trunk. So I still have to look at that. But as far as right now goes, the differential's pretty much ready to go in, and I'm putting the engine cradle in right now. All right, well, with the front K-member installed, the rack and pinions installed, I have the spindles pulled out of the box. I'm going to get these rusty old spindles cleaned up and give them a coat of paint so we can start assembling the front suspension. Well, with the engine sitting on its motor mounts and the new frame installed, I'm about at a good point, I would say, to start working on the suspension. So I'm going to start that for part 3. We're going to get the chassis put together and get this car back on its wheels. But as far as the rust repair goes, we're in pretty good shape. I think I got it mostly taken care of.